The flight had been long, but Zara had endured it with practiced patience. She had no choice. It wasn't as if she could say no when Adrian had ordered her to accompany him on this business trip. "I need my best designer on site," he had said, his voice void of any room for argument. And so, here she was, miles away from home, stuck in a different city, where everything was unfamiliar except for the one thing she wished she could avoid: Adrian Knight. The hotel they arrived at was nothing short of luxurious, 5-star, with its chandeliers glittering in the grand lobby and a scent of fresh roses lingering in the air. Zara had been looking forward to escaping into the privacy of her own room, away from Adrian's sharp tongue and the way he always managed to get under her skin. But of course, nothing in her life ever went that smoothly. "There's been a mix-up," the receptionist said, looking increasingly nervous as she typed furiously on her computer. "It seems that we, overbooked. Mr. Knight's suite is available, but Ms. Benson, I'm afraid your room was mistakenly assigned to another guest." Zara's stomach twisted. "What?" "I'm so sorry, Miss Benson. We're completely booked for the night. We can arrange another room tomorrow, but for now—" Zara's head snapped toward Adrian, who stood beside her with a look of absolute amusement. "Are you saying she has nowhere to stay?" he asked, feigning innocence. The receptionist gulped. "We can offer a cot for the lounge area, or perhaps—" "No need." Adrian cut her off smoothly, turning toward Zara with a smirk that made her want to strangle him. "She'll stay in my suite." Zara's heart nearly stopped. "Excuse me?" He shrugged. "Unless you'd rather sleep in the lobby." Her jaw clenched. "There has to be another option." "There isn't," Adrian said lazily, handing his credit card to the receptionist. "Come on, sweetheart. Don't look so thrilled." Zara inhaled sharply, reminding herself that murder was still illegal. She had no choice. She was going to have to share a room with him. The suite of temptation. The moment Zara stepped into the suite, she regretted every decision that had led her here. It wasn't just a hotel room, it was a palace. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the dazzling skyline, while rich velvet curtains framed the view. The living area was designed with dark leather furniture, sleek and expensive. And then there was the bedroom, because, of course, there was only one. One massive king-sized bed. She turned to Adrian, who was already loosening his tie, completely unbothered. "I'll take the couch," she blurted. He chuckled. "Suit yourself." Adrian disappeared into the bathroom, and Zara exhaled, trying to ground herself. She would survive this. She had to. But then he reappeared, wearing nothing but boxers. Zara's brain malfunctioned. Adrian Knight, the man she despised with every fiber of her being, stood before her, half-naked, his toned body bathed in the dim golden light of the suite. His abs were sculpted, the kind of perfect that looked like he had been carved by gods. His strong arms, the sharp lines of his jaw, the way his muscles moved so effortlessly, it was too much. She was not going to look. She was not going to react. But her body betrayed her, a wave of heat crawling up her neck as her gaze flickered over him for just a second too long. Adrian smirked. He knew. "Problem, sweetheart." His voice was pure sin. Zara snapped her eyes to his face. "Put some clothes on." He stretched, deliberately slow, his muscles flexing. "Why? This is my room. You're the one invading my space." Her hands curled into fists. "I didn't ask to be here." "And yet," he murmured, stepping closer, "here you are." Zara swallowed. He was too close, too warm, too intoxicating. "Stay on your side," she warned. He grinned. "Afraid you'll be tempted?" Zara let out a scoff. "You wish." But the truth was, she was already struggling. The night before the big presentation, Zara was determined to prepare. She sat at the suite's grand desk, flipping through notes, reading financial reports, and rehearsing everything that would be needed for tomorrow's pitch. She refused to mess this up. She was already on thin ice with Adrian after showing up late the other day. There was no way she'd let him have another reason to criticize her. But of course, he had other plans. Zara. She ignored him, keeping her focus on the laptop screen. Adrian's voice was smooth, teasing. We're going out. Her fingers tightened around the pen. No, we're not. Yes, we are. She sighed, exasperated, turning to face him. He was leaning against the wall, arms crossed, a smirk playing on his lips. He had changed into a dark-fitted shirt that clung to his muscles and black jeans that made him look even more infuriatingly attractive. I need to prepare for tomorrow, she said. You need to relax, he countered. It's just a few drinks, nothing crazy. I don't drink. His brow lifted. That's cute. But we both know you're coming with me. I'm not. You are. He pushed off the wall, walking toward her with that signature confidence, his presence unavoidable. He leaned down slightly, lowering his voice. It's a business trip, sweetheart. And in business, we entertain clients. Consider this a test run. Zara clenched her jaw. He was so insufferable, so arrogant. And yet, something about the way he was looking at her, challenging her, made her pulse quicken. She could say no. But then he smirked, like he had already won. And that was it. Fine, she snapped. One drink. He grinned. That's my girl. The music pulsed through Zara's veins as they stepped inside. The club was a world of its own. Dark, intoxicating, dangerous. Blue and red neon lights flickered across sleek leather booths, illuminating the sinful smiles of strangers. The bass thrummed through the air, vibrating in her chest, making it impossible to think straight. Zara shouldn't have come here. She shouldn't have let Adrian convince her, and she definitely shouldn't have let him order drinks for her. But she did. And now, she was 2 shots in, warmth spreading through her limbs, her usual restraint slipping away. Adrian, on the other hand, was completely in his element. He sat beside her at the VIP booth, drink in hand, watching her. She could feel his gaze burning into her skin, tracing the curve of her neck, the way her lips wrapped around the rim of her glass. You're staring, she murmured. He smirked. You're blushing. I'm not. You are. She glared at him, but the alcohol had loosened something in her chest, making it impossible to stay angry. The music was hypnotic, and for once, she wasn't thinking about deadlines, presentations, or how much she hated Adrian Knight. She was just feeling. And then the inevitable happened. Dance with me, he said. Zara let out a sharp laugh. Not happening. Adrian leaned in, his breath brushing against her ear. I wasn't asking. Before she could protest, he was pulling her to the dance floor. Zara should have pulled away. She should have walked off, called a cab, and gone back to the hotel. But she didn't. Instead, she found herself pressed against him, the heat of his body intoxicating, his hands gripping her waist as the music swallowed them whole. His touch was slow, deliberate, testing. Zara exhaled shakily as his fingers tightened slightly, guiding her movements, pressing her hips into his. It was nothing short of torture. Her back was against his chest, every inch of her body flush against his as they moved together. The rhythm was sinful, the kind of slow, rolling motion that sent a spark straight to her core. Zara's breath hitched as Adrian's hand slid up, trailing along her ribs before settling at her waist again. You feel good, he murmured, his lips grazing the shell of her ear. A shiver ran down her spine. She shouldn't like this. She hated him, but right now she couldn't think. She could only feel. The way his breath was uneven, the way his grip on her tightened when she rolled her hips a little too slow, the way his hand slipped into her hair, tugging just enough to make her let out a soft, involuntary moan. Adrian inhaled sharply, his grip tightening. Fuck, Zara. Her knees felt weak. She was burning. And then, he turned her around. Face to face now, her body still caged by his, Zara's breath hitched as Adrian studied her. His gaze dropped to her lips. She licked them, and his fingers flexed at her waist. The air between them was too thick, too dangerous. And then, his lips brushed hers, barely. A strangled sound left her throat as he deepened the kiss, his tongue teasing, tasting. His hand slid into her hair again, tugging her closer, swallowing the soft, breathy moan she let out. Zara's nails dug into his shoulders as heat curled low in her stomach. The bass throbbed through the air as Zara swayed, her body barely keeping up with the hypnotic rhythm of the music. She had no idea how many drinks Adrian had ordered for her, but she knew one thing. She was drunk, and worse, she was pressed up against him, his large hands gripping her waist, his body dangerously close, moving against hers in a way that sent heat curling in her stomach. She shouldn't be doing this. She shouldn't be letting him do this. But the warmth of the alcohol in her veins, mixed with the intoxicating scent of Adrian Knight, was a deadly combination. He leaned in, his lips grazing the shell of, not when his breath was warm against her neck, not when his hands were burning against her skin, not when every fiber of her body screamed for more. Adrian smirked, sensing her hesitation. His hands slid lower, teasing the curve of her hips, controlling her movements as he ground into her. Zara let out a shaky breath. He was so good at this. Too good. Her fingers dug into his forearms as his grip became firmer, his lips brushing against the sensitive spot on her neck. "Still silent?" he murmured. "I guess I'll have to make you beg." Zara's knees almost buckled. She needed to get out of here. Now. But Adrian wasn't done playing. He turned her around suddenly, forcing her to look at him. His dark eyes burned into hers, full of hunger, full of power. She opened her mouth to say something, anything, but then his lips crashed against hers, hard, demanding, possessive. Zara let out a soft whimper, her body melting against his as he devoured her. His hands tangled in her hair, tilting her head back as his tongue slid against hers, teasing, tasting, owning. And then, just as quickly, he pulled away, his lips hovering just inches from hers. Zara gasped, her eyes dazed. "Time to go," Adrian murmured. Zara barely remembered how they got back. All she knew was that one moment, they were in the club, and the next, they were stumbling into the hotel suite, the door slamming shut behind them. And then Adrian's mouth was on her again. She moaned as he pinned her against the wall, his body pressing into hers, his heat, his scent, everything about him making her dizzy. "Adrian." "Shh." His lips trailed down her jaw, his hands roaming everywhere, claiming her, owning her. Zara's body arched into him, her fingers clutching his shirt as if it were the only thing keeping her grounded. She should stop this. She should walk away. But then Adrian lifted her, carrying her effortlessly toward the bed, tossing her onto the mattress like she was his to ruin. Zara gasped, her heart pounding wildly as he hovered over her. "You're so beautiful," he murmured, his voice thick with desire. Her skin tingled as he brushed his lips against her throat, slowly, teasingly, sending a shiver down her spine. She whimpered as his hands traced over her body, touching, exploring, claiming. "Tell me," he murmured, his lips grazing her ear. "Tell me what you want." Zara's breath came in soft, desperate pants. Adrian bit her earlobe, a low growl rumbling in his chest. "Say it." Zara's fingers dug into his back, her body arching into him. "More," she finally gasped. "I want more." A dark smirk curled on Adrian's lips. "That's my girl." And then he took over her body, owning her, ruining her, making her beg for more. Zara woke up to the sound of her phone buzzing incessantly on the nightstand. Her head throbbed, and her body felt heavy, as if she'd been running a marathon in her sleep. She groaned, reaching for the phone, and her heart dropped when she saw the time. 10:47 a.m. "No, no, no!" she gasped, bolting upright. The presentation. It was supposed to start at 9:30. She was late. Horribly, unforgivably late. Panic surged through her as she scrambled out of bed, her mind racing. How could she have overslept? She never overslept. But then, the memories of last night came flooding back. The club, the drinks, the way Adrian had kissed her, the way she'd let him. Her cheeks burned with shame and frustration. She had been so reckless, so unprofessional, and now she was paying the price. She rushed to the bathroom, splashing cold water on her face, and threw on the first outfit she could find. Her hands trembled as she tried to fix her hair, but there was no time. She grabbed her laptop and notes, barely glancing at the empty suite as she bolted out the door. By the time Zara arrived at the conference room, it was empty. The clients were gone, the projector was off, and the only person left was Adrian, leaning casually against the table with his arms crossed and a smirk on his face. "Nice of you to join us," he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. Zara's stomach churned. I'm so sorry, I overslept. I didn't mean to." "Oversleep?" Adrian interrupted, raising an eyebrow. "You missed the most important presentation of the trip, Zara. Do you have any idea how unprofessional that is?" She flinched at his words, her cheeks burning. "I know. I'll fix this. I'll call the clients, It's already handled," he said coldly. "I had to step in and present your work. Luckily, I know it well enough to cover for you." Zara's heart sank. She hated the way he was looking at her, like she was a disappointment, like she'd let him down. And the worst part was, she had. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Adrian sighed, pushing off the table and walking toward her. "You're lucky the clients were impressed. They signed the deal. But this?" He gestured to her disheveled appearance. "This is unacceptable. You're better than this, Zara." His words stung more than she cared to admit. She wanted to argue, to defend herself, but she couldn't. He was right. "It won't happen again," she said quietly. Adrian studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded. "Good. Now get yourself together. We're celebrating the signed deal tonight on the yacht. Don't be late." The yacht was a floating palace, glittering under the night sky with soft music and the clink of champagne glasses. Zara had spent the entire afternoon preparing, determined to make up for her earlier mistake. She wore a sleek black dress that hugged her curves, her hair styled to perfection, and a smile plastered on her face despite the knot of anxiety in her stomach. She mingled with the clients, laughing at their jokes and charming them with her wit. But every time she glanced at Adrian, he was watching her with that same infuriating smirk, as if he knew exactly how uncomfortable she was. Then, he showed up. Liam Carter, one of the junior executives from the client's team, approached her with a warm smile. He was handsome in a boy-next-door kind of way, with sandy blonde hair and kind blue eyes. "Zara, right?" he said, extending a hand. "I just wanted to say, your work on this project is incredible. I've never seen such attention to detail." Zara blinked, surprised by the compliment. "Thank you. That means a lot." "No, thank you," Liam said, his smile widening. "I'm a bit of a design nerd, so I geeked out a little when I saw your portfolio. Mind if I steal you for a drink?" Zara hesitated, glancing toward Adrian, who was now deep in conversation with one of the clients. He didn't even look her way. "Sure," she said, forcing a smile. "A drink sounds great." As the night went on, Zara found herself enjoying Liam's company. He was easy to talk to, and for the first time all day, she felt like she could breathe. They laughed about their shared love of architecture, and he even managed to make her forget about Adrian for a while. But Adrian hadn't forgotten about her. From across the deck, he watched them, his jaw tightening as Liam leaned in to say something that made Zara laugh. His grip on his glass tightened, his usual composure slipping just enough for anyone paying attention to notice. But Zara wasn't paying attention. She was too busy enjoying the rare moment of peace. When Liam excused himself to grab another drink, Zara finally looked up, and her eyes met Adrian's. His expression was dark, his gaze intense, and for a moment, she felt a flicker of guilt. But then she reminded herself that he had no right to be jealous. He'd been the one to humiliate her earlier, the one to make her feel small. She turned away, refusing to let him ruin her night. For the rest of the evening, Adrian didn't speak to her. He didn't approach her, didn't acknowledge her, didn't even look her way. It was as if she didn't exist. And somehow, that hurt more than anything he could have said. As the party wound down, Zara found herself standing alone at the railing, staring out at the dark water. She felt a mix of emotions, relief that the day was over, frustration with herself, and a strange, aching emptiness that she couldn't quite explain. "Hey," a voice said softly behind her. She turned to see Liam holding 2 glasses of champagne. "Thought you might need this," he said, handing her one. Zara smiled, taking the glass. "Thanks." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the gentle rocking of the yacht soothing her frayed nerves. "You know," Liam said after a while, "you don't have to let him get to you." Zara frowned. "Who?" "Adrian," Liam said, his tone careful. "I've seen the way he looks at you, the way he talks to you. He's intense." Zara sighed, taking a sip of her champagne. "That's one way to put it." Liam chuckled. "Yeah, but you're stronger than you think. Don't let him make you doubt yourself." Zara looked at him, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I needed to hear that." Liam smiled. "Anytime." The yacht party ended with a heavy silence between Zara and Adrian. Liam, ever the gentleman, offered to walk her back to her hotel room. She accepted, partly because she didn't want to face Adrian alone, and partly because she was still reeling from his cold indifference. As they walked through the dimly lit hotel hallway, Liam kept the conversation light. "You know, Zara, you're one of the most fascinating people I've ever met," he said, his tone warm and genuine. Zara forced a smile, though her mind was elsewhere. "Thanks, Liam. That's kind of you to say." When they reached her suite, Liam hesitated, his hands in his pockets. "If you ever need someone to talk to, or just someone to listen, I'm here." Zara nodded, touched by his kindness. "I appreciate that. Really." He smiled, then turned to leave. But before he could go, the door to the suite swung open. Adrian stood there, his expression dark and unreadable. His eyes flicked from Zara to Liam, and a muscle in his jaw twitched. "Am I interrupting something?" he asked, his voice icy. Zara's stomach dropped. "Adrian, what are you doing here?" He stepped into the hallway, his presence towering and intimidating. "I live here, remember? Or did you forget that while you were busy playing house with him?" Liam held up his hands, clearly sensing the tension. "Look, I was just walking Zara back. I'll leave you two to—" "No!" Adrian interrupted, his tone sharp. "You'll leave, now." Liam glanced at Zara, who gave him a small, apologetic nod. He sighed, then walked away, leaving her alone with Adrian. The moment Liam was out of earshot, Adrian turned to Zara, his eyes blazing. "What the hell was that?" Zara crossed her arms, refusing to back down. "What are you talking about? He was just being nice." "Nice?" Adrian scoffed, stepping closer. "Do you really think he's just being nice? Or are you that naive?" Zara's cheeks flushed with anger. "You don't get to talk to me like that. You don't get to act like you own me." Before she could respond, he turned and walked back into the suite, slamming the door behind her. The next morning, Zara and Adrian boarded the private jet back home. The flight was excruciatingly quiet, the tension between them so thick it felt suffocating. Adrian buried himself in work, barely glancing her way, while Zara stared out the window, her mind racing. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, to make him explain why he was acting like this. But she couldn't bring herself to break the silence. Instead, she sat there, stewing in her frustration and confusion. A few days after returning home, Zara walked into the apartment to find it eerily quiet. At first, she didn't think much of it. Adrian often worked late. But as the hours passed and he didn't come home, she began to feel a gnawing sense of unease. It wasn't until the next morning that she noticed his things were gone. His coat, his shoes, the stack of papers he always left on the counter, all of it was missing. The apartment felt hollow, the silence deafening. Zara sank onto the couch, staring at the empty space where his belongings used to be. She should have felt relieved. Living with Adrian had been a constant battle of wills, a never-ending push and pull. But instead, she felt lost. The apartment felt too big, too quiet, without his sharp remarks and infuriating presence. Over the next few weeks, Liam kept in touch. He texted her regularly, checking in to see how she was doing. He even sent her a care package after hearing she'd been working late nights, a box filled with her favorite snacks, a scented candle, and a note that read, "Don't forget to take care of yourself." It was sweet. Too sweet. Zara appreciated his kindness, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. Liam was everything Adrian wasn't: gentle, considerate, predictable. And yet, she couldn't bring herself to feel anything more than gratitude. One evening, Zara met up with her best friend, Ethan, at their favorite cafe. Ethan was her rock, a flamboyant, quick-witted fashion designer who always knew how to make her laugh. He was also the only person she trusted to give her honest advice. "So," Ethan said, stirring his iced latte with a dramatic flourish, "how's Mr. Tall, dark, and brooding? Still making your life a living hell?" Zara sighed, playing with the straw in her drink. "He moved out." Ethan's eyes widened. "Wait, what? When? Why didn't you tell me?" "It just happened," she said, shrugging. "And honestly, I don't know how I feel about it." Ethan studied her for a moment, his expression softening. "You miss him, don't you?" Zara hesitated, then nodded. "I hate that I do. He's arrogant, controlling, and infuriating. But, I don't know. The apartment feels empty without him." Ethan reached across the table, squeezing her hand. "Honey, you've got it bad." She groaned, burying her face in her hands. "I know. And to make things worse, Liam keeps texting me. He's so sweet, Ethan. He's everything Adrian isn't. But I don't feel anything for him." Ethan smirked. "Of course you don't. You're too busy pining over Mr. Broody Billionaire." Zara glared at him. "I'm not pining." "Sure you're not," Ethan said, rolling his eyes. "Look, Zara, you can't force yourself to feel something that isn't there. Liam might be a sweetheart, but if he's not the one, he's not the one. And as for Adrian..." He paused, his tone turning serious. "You need to figure out what you really want, because this back-and-forth thing you've got going on, it's not healthy." Zara sighed, knowing he was right. But figuring out what she wanted felt impossible when her heart and her head were at war. As the days turned into weeks, Zara tried to focus on work, throwing herself into her projects to distract herself from the emptiness in her apartment and in her heart. Liam continued to text her, but she kept her responses polite and distant. Meanwhile, Adrian was nowhere to be found. He didn't call, didn't text, didn't show up at the office. It was as if he'd disappeared from her life completely. And yet, she couldn't stop thinking about him. To be continued.